Let me pray. Father, thank you that we've gathered this morning, and as we open this reading from Luke's Gospel, please help us to make sense of it, and that you might bring it to our hearts and to our minds. Amen. Some of us here have been followers of Jesus for many years. Some were raised in Christian families. Others of us, like myself, rejected our parents' beliefs and decided to follow Jesus. But for those who have, and there are others here this morning who may not have actually ever made that decision to follow Jesus. But for those that have you ever wondered whether you made the right decision? Not all the time, and less as I get older, but sometimes that thought comes to my mind. Have I made the right decision in following Jesus? The time in my life when I wonder that is when I think about all my friends and family who show no interest in Jesus at all. So Jesus, who is so important to me, plays no role in their life whatsoever. You see, the vast majority of people I know don't care at all for Jesus. They're positive towards him, how can you not be? But really nothing more than that. And it actually makes me feel foolish sometimes. And when I read the papers or watch on TV, again, the things that I think are earth-shatteringly important rarely get a mention, unless they're criticised or even ridiculed. Have we made a good decision? Can so many apparently thoughtful people out there be so wrong? But I don't think it's just for intellectual reasons they reject Jesus. Recently I was chatting with a client about being a real estate agent and a part-time minister at the same time, and we started having this light-hearted discussion about Christian belief, and his position was Christianity was unreasonable. Historically without foundation, he declared. And then he said, and listen to what Mr. Christianity is Unreasonable said. He said, I threw in my Christian beliefs when I hit university and found women and beer. Now, I can understand the sentiment completely, but it doesn't sound too intellectually rigorous, does it? Apparently, he couldn't see that. I don't think it's for genuinely intellectual reasons people reject Jesus. It's something else. You see, people who saw and heard this amazing Jesus in the flesh, many rejected him. Despite thousands of people clamouring to hear Jesus teach and to see Jesus perform miracles, at the end of his ministry, at his death, Luke in the book of Acts tells us there were only 120 disciples. So thousands at the peak of his popularity, tens of thousands perhaps, and only 120 at the end of the day. Why were there so few followers of Jesus at the end of his ministry? And in our context, 21st century Australia, why relatively so few today? Well, I think the passage that was read from the Gospel of Luke tells us exactly why. There's a cost to following Jesus. It will cost you to follow Jesus. So the passage in Luke 14 that Ross read for us tells us large crowds were travelling with Jesus because Jesus created enormous interest in the first century as a wonder worker. That's how one contemporary first century writer described Jesus. And the fact that the non-Christian historians of that period mention this Galilean preacher at all tells us something was truly remarkable about Jesus. And then when you read through Luke or any of the other Gospels, it records some of the miracles that Jesus did. A woman who had been bleeding, healed, bleeding for 12 years, healed. A young girl brought back from death. A man with a skin disease healed instantly. So people had seen this. Ordinary, everyday people like you and me who knew that dead girls don't come back to life. who knew that leprosy cannot be healed, who knew that paralysed people can't walk, but they'd witnessed it with their own eyes. And that's why the crowds were there. But in an act that would have had the publicity guys cutting their wrists, Jesus turns to this huge crowd and he says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." Wow. You don't see that on church billboards, do you? Forget Jesus meek and mild. It's striking. It's even offensive, isn't it? Hate is this very powerful word. Why did Jesus use it? What's he actually saying? Well, we know all through the Bible there are commands to love your neighbour, care for your family, honour your parents. So we just can't understand hate here at face value. Or Jesus would be profoundly contradicting himself, wouldn't he? So it pushes us, when we find a contradiction, to ask a few more questions, to investigate. And historical insight here is really helpful. It's actually a simple comparison. In Semitic languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, the use of comparatives, that is less than or more than, was not common. More common, but meaning exactly the same thing, was this sort of stark contrast. So in Hebrew thought, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, actually means Jacob was preferable and chosen over Esau. It doesn't literally mean hate. It's just a turn of phrase. Hard for us not to hear it literally, but it's simply an ancient statement of comparison. Other evidence is that in Matthew's Gospel, this exact statement by Jesus is actually turned into a more than statement to give it clear meaning. So Matthew records Jesus saying, "If you love your Father more than me, you cannot be my disciple." So different words, more palatable for us moderns maybe, but the same meaning to the ancients. Do you understand that? So Jesus' statement in effect means having the priority of obeying Jesus above all your other allegiances, including that which is most precious, your family. I have a friend named Jamal. He's not from Australia. He came from Malaysia many years ago. He was a practicing Muslim. In fact, his grandfather ran the local mosque back at home. In the early 80s, he came to Australia to study at university, mechanical engineering. And during that time, through the most unspectacular bloke you can imagine who lived in the same block of flats, Jamal became a Christian. And from that point on, his parents refused to talk to him, wouldn't take his calls. His own parents would return his letters unopened. After he graduated from university, he stayed in Australia and he worked as an engineer, and every fortnight he would send home a large chunk of his pay. And in return, he received death threats from his family. In some countries in the world today, you will suffer physical abuse for following Jesus. For Jamal, it really was Jesus or his family. So very simply, the type of discipleship that Jesus demands, with him as the number one priority in your life, thins out the crowd. Jesus then goes on in verse 27, and whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Again, it's a well-known saying of Jesus. It's a saying because of Jesus' death on the cross speaks powerfully, but a number of years ago, a group of scholars challenged the belief that this was an authentic statement of Jesus. And then Philip Adams, the commentator, took up this scepticism in his column in The Australian a few months later, saying it's obviously unauthentic because Jesus hadn't died yet, and therefore the reference to the cross had no meaning. They are silly words, aren't they? It may not be obvious to you, and my guess it wasn't obvious to his readers. That is a puzzling statement for Adams to make. And he went on to say, this is just an example of how historically unreliable the Gospels are. Now, I say the statement's puzzling because historians estimate that under Roman rule in the first century, more than 20,000 Jews were crucified by the Romans in Israel. In one famous incident that has obviously escaped Adams' attention, 800 Pharisees were crucified at one time in Jerusalem. See, before and after Jesus, to take up your cross in the first century meant death. So Jesus is very dramatically and starkly saying, if you want to follow me, you must die. You must crucify yourself. Again, not literally, but die to self, to your goals, to your ambitions, to your thinking, to your desires. So right at this time, huge crowds were following Jesus, clamouring after him. He had them in the palm of his hand, and that's what he said to them. And the result? Thousands of followers down to maybe 120 at his death. Because people had asked themselves the question, why on earth should I follow Jesus? So when we're explaining to friends and family the claims of Jesus, the gospel, we need to remember, along with all the great stuff about forgiveness and purpose in life and all the great outcomes for relationships and families, we're actually saying to them, die to yourself and live for Jesus. Why would anyone do it? Why would anyone become a Christian? It's no wonder we are a minority in society. It's no wonder we've got to turn up here every Sunday, me included, to be convinced to keep being Christian. No wonder people stop following Jesus. To die to self absolutely goes against the grain. Have you ever noticed when you're looking at a group photo that you're in, you always look for yourself first? Or is that just me? Have you ever been to a close friend's house and you've seen a beautiful photo display or on their fridge and you look to see if there's a photo of you there? And if you're not, you're a little bit hurt. You know, why aren't I there? You wouldn't dare say it, but sometimes we think it, don't we? Can you see who inevitably is always our concern? It is us. Not Jesus. And that's completely natural. And so we run along with our natural instincts that want us to be number one, and we run along with a culture that tells us that we should be number one. But Jesus says in a universe where he is king, he's number one. And can you see the inevitable clash? Luke here in this passage gives us the softened version, if you can believe that. 5 chapters later, Jesus says you must take up your cross daily. So that's the heart of being Christian. It's not about making some profession 5 years ago or being confirmed 30 years ago, as meaningful as those events are. It's not even about turning up to church occasionally or regularly. Being Christian is about dying to self daily. That daily determination to say, I want to follow Jesus in this circumstance. It's about real sweat and perseverance, but not despair, because whenever we fail, the grace of God. But this is what Jesus is talking about. And so Jesus, having stated to this huge crowd what it means to follow him, he then tells these two funny stories. or not funny ha-ha, but unusual. The first story is verse 28. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Why don't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. What's that about? Around the corner from where we used to live, there was a house half finished. I'm guessing there's probably a couple around here as well. You know, weeds grow 2 feet tall, the timber starts to rot, and everyone drives by saying, who started this and has just left it unfinished? It's foolish. In this little story, Jesus is saying, soberly think about the realities of following Jesus. Don't make a rush decision. Count what it's going to cost you. And that's exactly what's wrong with emotionally generated responses to Jesus. Powerful music, manipulative speaker. People don't think. They don't weigh things up. But we need to count the cost of what following Jesus means. A few of us here in Australia will lose our families like Jamal, though sadly even here that actually happens. But you may be ridiculed because you're a Christian. You may be shunned by those around you because you're a Christian. There can be a social cost of being a Christian. You don't quite fit into some situations. And our ideas and our principles and our beliefs aren't the flavour of the month, are they? In fact, sometimes they're downright offensive to other people. So we're a minority, and that is uncomfortable. The cost is real. So Jesus is saying, don't look like a fool by starting on the way and not finishing. Now, at this point, if I was in the crowd, I'd be ready to throw in the towel. Following Jesus is too hard. Can you see that? I'm one of the people in the crowd that's had a fantastic time seeing the miracles. I'm blown away by this guy, but I'm losing interest very quickly because the cost is too high. And right at that point, Jesus explains the reality that determines my decision. He shows me the reality that makes me follow, and you must understand this next crucial story, verse 31. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. So the situation is that one king is hopelessly overpowered. 20,000 troops are going to smash 10,000 troops, aren't they? So it'd be the height of stupidity for the weak king not to make peace while he can. This is a picture of humanity and God. Humanity set itself up as king, and Jesus wants us to understand that because of this, there's a conflict between us and the real king. It is the inevitable clash that I talked about earlier. It is the ultimate power struggle, and we have got no power. We are going to be smashed. God is this powerful king coming to humanity, and because of our sin and our rebellion, we're at war with him. The day of reckoning is coming. But right now is this opportunity to make peace with God. Jesus is king. He's owed our worship. It's what Jesus says over and over and over again. And just like the weak king and the strong king, we need to make peace while we can, because one day it'll be too late. The key idea here is making peace means absolute surrender. Verse 33. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Just like the weak king surrenders. That's what we've got to do to God. All your rights, all your privileges, and submit. It is a complete and utter surrender. That's what discipleship is. That's what being a Christian is, what a follower of Jesus is. But most people in this world won't do it. That's why the church is a minority. It's why some people start following Jesus and they give up. Intellectual misgivings are a complete furphy. It's women and beer. It's prestige and power. It's acceptance and being well thought of. There's a cost to following Jesus. So can you see how these two stories work? Jesus saying, given what he demands, sit down and work out if you can afford to follow me. But given what the future holds, sit down and work out if you can afford not to follow me. Jesus is a king, and he sent Jesus, and you either make peace or you remain at war. And so those times that I wonder if I've made the right decision, and I do, I recall and I remember who Jesus is. God's exalted and coming King, and I press on. And when my Christian friends struggle and wonder if they've made a good decision, I remind them who Jesus is. And so if you're struggling right now, today, remember who Jesus is. God's coming King. In verse 34, it's the same idea. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown out. Same idea. It just means if something doesn't do what it's supposed to do, it's useless. If watermelon isn't sweet, it's useless. If a fridge doesn't keep your beers cold, it's useless. If discipleship isn't surrender, it's useless. It's to be tossed away. So as I finish, let me ask you, is your faith actually worth something? Does it make a significant difference to how you live? Have you really surrendered? Is it just about coming to church, or does it affect how you speak, what you do, how you live, how you spend, how you treat people? Does your thinking submit to Jesus, or do you pick and choose from what Jesus and his apostles say? For the vast majority of us sitting here today, the answer is clear. Jesus is your King. I can see it a mile away. Your life, your ambitions are shaped by Jesus in all those ways. And God rejoices in that. Let me pray. Father, forgive us for when we forget that you are the King of the universe, that you reign. Thank you for your grace and gentleness in reaching out to us and welcoming and giving us the invitation for peace. Father, please help us to embrace that peace with enthusiasm and vigour, and help us to walk in your grace. Father, please, as we contemplate discipleship and what it means to follow you, please shape every part of our life. And when we fail you, as we do daily, help us to walk in your grace. Amen.